If I told you that you were going to be on Jeopardy, how would you go about preparing? You might read some trivia books. You might flip through a world atlas. You might watch Ken Jennings in action. You might read up on all of that Shakespeare that you otherwise pretend to know. You might do a deep dive into 80s hair bands. And if I told you you were going to take the half-court shot at an NBA game for the chance to win $50,000, how would you prepare for that? You'd probably get a basketball and go to the YMCA or the JCC and practice chucking up half-court shots until your arms were about ready to fall off. And if I told you that you were going to win a $1 billion Mega Millions jackpot, what might you do then? You'd likely find a good accountant, an even better lawyer. You'd figure out how to unlist your cell phone from your high school reunion directory. And you would no doubt call your rabbi to refamiliarize yourself with the biblical precept of tithing. Not necessarily in that order, though, friends. Feel free to call me first. As Michael Schur, the writer of hit shows like The Office and The Good Place, discusses in a pretty great TED Talk, it's highly unlikely that any of these things are actually going to happen. Even knowing it's almost impossible, we spend a lot of time daydreaming and mentally preparing for just such scenarios. And sometimes we need that escape. But wouldn't it be better if we could prepare for something that's more likely, something a little bit more common, something perhaps that we will do every day? As we begin the year 5783, we each need a little bit of practice, a little bit of a refresher course on the experience of being human. Not because you don't have a beautiful heart or a good neshama, God forbid, and who am I to cast aspersions, but because the forces and factors pressing against us from seemingly all sides have been subtly sapping us of our virtuous humanity. Earlier this year, researchers Mom Farima Torre-Tiller and Lily Wong from Northwestern University and Zhejiang University published a series of 10 peer-reviewed studies demonstrating that we make better, more virtuous decisions when we're presented with information on paper than when we're in the digital space. We're more likely to choose educationally or culturally enriching books when we read a paper book list than when we scroll through Amazon. We're more likely to grant an impoverished child a material wish if we read it on paper rather than on our Androids. We're more likely to volunteer our time or donate our money. We're even more likely to make better health decisions when we hold a paper restaurant menu than when we scan a QR code or order online. How could this be? MRIs of the human brain show that holding something physical, a simple piece of paper, helps a decision feel more real, more tangible, and more consequential. The opposite, of course, is true in the digital space. It's just pretend. We aren't hurting anyone. It doesn't even count. It's not real, we tell ourselves about being online. And the worst part is our brains actually believe it because those decisions don't register on an MRI. When interacting with physical material, the parts of our brain, the right retrosplenial cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the cingulate cortex, all of those parts of your brain that deal with the integration of emotional and visual and spatial information, they activate in ways they simply do not when we see virtual media, even when we know there are real-world consequences to our actions. We've long known that forking over hard-earned dollar bills makes us make better financial decisions than when we pay with credit cards or when we pay online. And we now know that our decision-making in the digital space struggles to live up to our highest values. If you've ever read the comment section after an online news story, or interacted with a casual acquaintance, over social media about anything that might, possibly, could conceivably be related to anything political, you've experienced how true this is. We are actually demonstrably not our best selves in the digital space. Our brains quite literally don't work in the way we would expect. Yet we live in an increasingly digital world. Zoom and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and electronic medical records and paying bills online and direct deposit and online Torah Center registration and fundraising emails and QR codes at restaurants and ordering groceries online in Houston, we have a problem. Our world is on a trajectory to become increasingly, perhaps fully virtual. And it's leaving our very humanity behind. It's why we need some practice at the mere act of being human. Unlike being on Jeopardy or hitting a half-court shot or winning the lottery, it's something that we have to do every single day. So why not reclaim a bit of our virtuous humanity from the encroaching dehumanization of the digital world? I'd encourage you to start small. An encouraging smile for someone who looks like they're having a rough day. Go out of your way to say something kind to a friend, your kids, someone you work with. Hold the door open for the next person in the restaurant, even if it means they're going to get that table first. These are super small things that you're probably already doing. And each of them makes us pause long enough to recognize that there is another fellow human being involved in the interaction. When you smile at someone, so often you see a smile in return. When you hold the door open or sympathize with someone equally inconvenienced, we see that our actions, all of our actions, impact other human beings. I want you, I want me, I want us to think of the needs and wants and feelings of other people so often that it becomes habitual and instinctive and impossible not to do, even in that virtual space that our brains pretend isn't real, because we know it is real. Lindy West, a columnist and author and critic, shared her experience of confronting a man who had been trolling her on the internet in the most horrendous way possible, by opening accounts in the name of her deceased father to demean her in a way that would be even more emotionally damaging. The comments were as terrible and hurtful and jarring as you can imagine, and Miss West decided to share her pain publicly, which led to her receiving the most unlikely of emails, and I quote, "Hey Lindy, I don't know why or even when I started trolling you. It was the lowest thing I've ever done. There is a living, breathing human being who is reading this stuff. I'm done being a troll. I made a donation in memory of your dad, and again, I apologize." The process of reflection that this man undertook, which we have to imagine is exceedingly rare among people pushing vitriol and bile in the digital space, led him to his light bulb moment that Lindy West is a living, breathing human being. If you pinch her, she'll scream. If you poke her, she'll bleed. If you pretend to be her deceased father to troll her online, she will cry. No kidding! We should all be screaming, of course she is a real person. But that's not how our brains are wired. Things we would never write with a physical pen, we type on a keyboard all of the time. Things we would never say to a person's face get said over a Zoom call. Our brains discount that virtual space, and we must fight to hold on to our virtuous humanity. Start small. Think of the wants and needs of other people so often that that choice becomes a habit, becomes a nearly unconscious always behavior that will emerge even in the virtual space. It's the first way we might practice the act of being human. Second, we might do a bit of study. And this is Michael Shore's point. Remember him, the creator of The Good Place? When confronted with his own moral failure and lack of humanity, He started to study, to keep from making the same mistakes again, to practice being human. Shore suggests that we read theories of ethics to better understand, quote, what they say, what they mean, how they purport to help us make better decisions and be better people. If Shore's point sounds to you to be very Jewish, it's likely because it is, because he is. A central thread of the show, The Good Place, not The Office or Parks and Rec, is about studying in order to benefit yourself and others in the world around you. It's pretty fortunate that we have an age-old tradition and source of wisdom literature upon which to draw. In Proverbs we read, "Do not devise harm against your fellow human beings. Do not quarrel with them without cause when they have done you no harm." A text 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old, that could have been written for Lindy West's Troll. In the Mishnah we read, "In a place where there are no human beings, strive to be one." A text 1,800 years old that could have been written for reclaiming our humanity in the digital space. And in Torah and Talmud and Midrash and Responsa and Musar, we learn enduring lessons that transcend their time and impart essential wisdom about the mere act of being human. So let's use 5783 for some self-study as we practice the act of being human. Struggle through Maimonides' Guide for the Perplexed. Join us for Torah study on Shabbat morning. Attend a class on Musar, concrete instructions to live an ethical life, or read about Jewish business and legal and ethical traditions. Study our deep tradition will help us prepare for the inevitable complications that arise from being human, and they will help us to make better decisions and to be better people, both face to face and fingers to digital device. Finally, to practice being human in the new year, we must renew our focus on that which we can control. When asked about how on earth one person can make a meaningful difference against the enormity and complexity of the world challenges, Rabbi Daniel Hartman suggested we should narrow the scope to that which we can control. We can't end the war in Ukraine, or improve the conditions for women in Afghanistan, or feed every hungry person in Allegheny County. We can, however, tidy up our corner of the world, that which is within our sphere of influence, making ethical decisions even when it feels lonely, modeling through our actions and our words the kind of world in which we want to live, making differences where we uniquely can. It may not feel enough with all of the injustice constantly swirling in 2022, but to be paralyzed by the enormity of the challenge isn't enough either. Ani ve'ata nishanet ha'alam, az yavo kvar kulam, Israeli singer Arik Einstein sang. You and I will change this world, and then others will join us. They'll follow along. Ani ve'ata ninaseh mechat kala. We need to start from the beginning, he says, to start small. A single small act of kindness. The things you are already doing, repeated over and over again, until our habit becomes unconscious and carries over into the increasingly digital world that our brains struggle to grasp is as real as the piece of paper that you can hold in your hand. Study the age-old wisdom now available at our fingertips, ironically, thanks to that digital age. Assess and glean and prepare to better respond to the ethical challenges we as human beings face in our face-to-face interactions and online with people that we know are living and breathing human beings. Focus on changing that which is in your control, tangible actions that we, each of us, can do, regardless of what is swirling around or imposed upon us. And make no mistake, being decent, virtuous people is a choice, even when our brains want to pretend it isn't so. I do hope you make it on Jeopardy! I hope you have a chance to make that half-court shot, though it's an even further dream in a city without a professional basketball team. And I really hope you win the lottery, and don't forget to give Temple a cut. We spend lots of time daydreaming and mentally preparing for these scenarios because sometimes we need that escape. But most of all, I hope you spend the 5783 preparing for that which is more likely, more common, something we're asked to do every day, to strive to be human, even in places where our brains don't believe we have to be. Our world is on a trajectory to become increasingly, perhaps fully virtual. We can't change the negative influence of that virtual world on our humanity, but we can refuse to leave our virtuous humanity behind. Start small, study, focus on what you can control, practice the mere act of being human. Ani ve'ata nishaneh et ha'olam. Then you and I will begin to change this world. Shana Tova.